Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I have 3 chilling lockdown stories that will make your blood run cold. These are real experiences that show just how quickly a normal school day can turn into a nightmare. Story number 1. The chemistry class incident. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon in my AP chemistry class. We were in the middle of reviewing for our upcoming midterm when Mrs. Patterson was explaining molecular structures on the whiteboard. The classroom felt warm and stuffy, and half the class looked like they were about to fall asleep. I remember I was doodling in my notebook margins when it happened. The principal's voice crackled through the intercom system, but something was different. His usually calm, professional tone was replaced by something urgent and shaky. All teachers, this is a code red lockdown. This is not a drill. Secure your classrooms immediately. The change in our teacher was instant. Mrs. Patterson, who was normally this sweet, soft-spoken woman, suddenly transformed. She sprinted to the door, turned the deadbolt, and started shoving desks against it. Her hands were literally shaking as she switched off the lights and yanked down the window blinds. Everyone to the back corner. Now, she whispered harshly. We all scrambled to the far corner of the room, huddling together in the darkness. That's when we heard it, shouting coming from somewhere in the main hallway. It wasn't the normal sound of students being loud between classes. This was different, angry, violent. The shouting got closer, and we could make out actual words. Where is she? I know she's here somewhere. 2 girls in my class started crying silently, tears streaming down their faces. The guy next to me was breathing so hard, I thought he might hyperventilate. Then we heard footsteps right outside our door. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. The rattling became more violent, and whoever was out there started pounding on the door. The desks Mrs. Patterson had stacked against it started to shake and scrape against the floor. Open this door. I know you're in there. I've never been so terrified in my entire life. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, listening to this person try to break down our door. Finally, the pounding stopped, and the footsteps moved away down the hall. 20 minutes later, the principal came back on the intercom. His voice was still shaky, but he explained that they had the situation under control. Apparently, a man whose daughter attended our school had found out she was dating someone he didn't approve of. He came to the school in a rage, demanding to see her, and when the office staff refused, he completely lost it. Security cameras later showed him running through the halls, checking every classroom, looking for his daughter. The scariest part, they found a baseball bat in his car afterward. Thank God our teacher acted so quickly, because I'm convinced he would have hurt someone if he'd gotten into any of the classrooms. The man was arrested, and his daughter was transferred to a different school for her own safety. But I still get chills thinking about that door handle rattling and knowing there was only a few pieces of furniture between us and someone who wanted to hurt people. Story number 2, the playground threat. This happened during my 8th grade year at Roosevelt Middle School. It was early November, and we were having one of those perfect fall days. Crisp air, clear skies, the kind of day that makes you actually want to be outside for recess. I was playing basketball with my friends Jake and Marcus on the outdoor courts, when we heard what sounded like firecrackers going off somewhere beyond the school fence. Pop, 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 pop. 4 distinct sounds. Probably just someone setting off leftover Halloween fireworks, Jake said. still dribbling the ball. But then Mrs. Coleman, one of the playground supervisors, came running toward us with a look of pure panic on her face. She was frantically waving her arms and shouting for everyone to get inside immediately. Everyone inside. Lockdown. Move, move, move. The entire playground erupted into chaos. Kids were screaming. Some were crying. Everyone was running in different directions trying to get to the nearest door. I got separated from Jake and Marcus in the crowd and ended up being pushed into the gymnasium with about 50 other students. Once we were inside, the teachers locked all the doors and made us sit against the far wall, away from the windows. Coach Rodriguez was trying to keep everyone calm, but you could tell he was scared too. His voice kept cracking when he spoke. "Just stay quiet and everything will be fine," he kept repeating. But nobody believed him. Through the high windows of the gym, we could see police cars pulling up to the school. Not just one or two, but like 8 or 9 cars with their lights flashing. That's when we knew this wasn't just a drill or a false alarm. My friend Sarah, who was sitting next to me, whispered that she'd heard one of the teachers on their radio saying something about an armed individual near the school property. The words "armed individual" made my stomach drop. We sat there for over an hour, just listening to sirens and helicopter sounds outside. Some kids were texting their parents. Others were just staring at the floor, trying not to cry. I kept thinking about those popping sounds we'd heard, and wondering if they really were firecrackers. Finally, the principal came into the gym and explained what had happened. There was a house right next to our school property where this guy lived alone. Apparently, he'd been having some kind of mental breakdown for weeks, and that morning he'd fired several shots into the air from his backyard while screaming about keeping the kids away from his property. A neighbor had called the police when they saw him walking around his yard with the gun, getting closer and closer to the school fence. That's when they called the lockdown. They weren't sure if he was planning to come onto school grounds or what his intentions were. The SWAT team ended up surrounding his house, and it took them 3 hours to talk him into surrendering peacefully. Turns out, the guy was a military veteran who'd been struggling with PTSD and hadn't been taking his medication. He'd never actually intended to hurt anyone at the school, but in his confused state, he thought students were somehow threatening him. The whole thing could have ended so much worse. What still haunts me is that we were playing basketball literally 50 feet from where this guy was standing with a loaded gun. If the lockdown had been called just 5 minutes later, we might have been outside when he decided to walk closer to the fence. Story number 3, The Substitute's Nightmare. This story is probably the most terrifying because I was actually working at the school when it happened. I'm 24 now, and last year I got a job as a teaching assistant at Lincoln Elementary, the same school I attended as a kid. It felt great being back in those familiar hallways, helping out in the classrooms where I'd learned to read and write. I was working with Mrs. Garcia's 3rd grade class that day, helping some kids with their math worksheets during their afternoon work time. It was one of those peaceful, normal school days where everything was going smoothly and the kids were actually behaving. I was kneeling next to Tommy's desk, helping him with a multiplication problem, when the intercom suddenly crackled to life. But instead of our principal's voice, it was our secretary, Mrs. Henderson, and she sounded absolutely terrified. Code red, lockdown, all staff. This is not a drill. Secure your students immediately. I repeat, this is not a drill. Mrs. Garcia immediately went into action. She quickly turned off the lights, locked the classroom door, and started moving the kids away from the windows. But these were third graders. They didn't understand what was happening, and some of them started getting scared and crying. "Are we playing the hiding game?" little Emma asked, her voice shaking. "Something like that, sweetie," Mrs. Garcia whispered, trying to keep her voice calm. "We're just going to be very quiet for a little while." We huddled all 22 kids in the reading corner, behind some bookshelves where they couldn't be seen from the door's window. I was trying to keep the kids calm by quietly reading them a story when we heard yelling coming from somewhere in the building. It wasn't kid yelling, it was an adult man's voice, and he was angry, really angry. We couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to make every adult in the room go pale. The worst part was watching these little kids' faces as they realized something was really wrong. 8-year-olds are smart. They could sense our fear even though we were trying to hide it. The yelling got closer, and then we heard banging, like someone was hitting doors or walls as they moved through the hallway. Each bang made all of us jump, and a few more kids started crying softly. Mrs. Garcia was texting frantically on her phone, probably trying to get information from other teachers or the office. I was holding 2 scared kids who had grabbed onto my arms and wouldn't let go. Then the banging stopped, and everything went quiet. That silence was somehow even scarier than the noise had been. We stayed in that corner for 45 minutes before the principal's voice finally came back on the intercom, sounding exhausted and shaken. "The lockdown is over. All students and staff are safe. Teachers, please remain in your classrooms until further notice." Later, we found out what had happened. See, his daughter, even though he wasn't supposed to have any contact with her due to a restraining order. When the office staff refused and tried to call security, he completely lost it. He'd pushed past the front desk and started running through the halls, looking for his daughter's classroom. The banging we'd heard was him trying to force open locked classroom doors. Security cameras showed him actually kicking and punching doors, completely out of control. The police arrived within 10 minutes and found him in the main hallway, still screaming about wanting to see his daughter. He was arrested for trespassing, violating a restraining order, and terroristic threatening. The most disturbing part: his daughter was one of the kids in our classroom that day. She'd been sitting right next to me during the lockdown, not knowing that the angry man trying to break down doors was her own father. That little girl had to be picked up by her grandmother that day, and she didn't come back to school for a week. When she did return, she was quieter, more withdrawn. It broke my heart thinking about how that experience affected not just her, but all those innocent kids who just wanted to learn their multiplication tables and go home to play. These experiences have changed how I think about school safety forever. What started as normal, boring school days turned into situations where we genuinely feared for our lives. The scariest part is how quickly everything can change. One moment, you're worried about a test or what's for lunch, and the next moment, you're hiding in the dark, hoping a locked door will keep you safe. If you're still in school, please take lockdown drills seriously. Pay attention to where the safe corners are in your classrooms. Know where the exits are, and always listen to your teachers during these situations. You never know when a drill might become the real thing, and being prepared could save your life.